When I went into the first office that I had as an educational psychologist, which was in 1969, it's in the London Borough of Haringey. One of the things I remember was a filing cabinet that we couldn't get rid of, and it was full of the copies of test papers when the educational psychologists in the borough had tested kids whose parents had appealed after the 11 plus examination. The parents wanted a grammar school, and not in my time, but in a time very shortly before I arrived there, they were still educational psychologists doing one-off tests to check the group IQ measures that were used for the grammar school selection. It was still the expectation then in the child guidance unit that I worked in, a multidisciplinary team of child psychiatrists, psychotherapists, psychiatric social workers, and myself and a colleague as educational psychologists. It was still an expectation that the educational psychologist would provide some hard test data, which would be part of the context for what other people were going to be doing, which we thought of as the real work. In a very short time, that was, is the word undermined? Yes, I think it probably is. Undermined by our mutual impatience with that notion of the role. My social worker colleagues were engaged in family therapy, and they wanted someone within the family therapy team who would be able to talk through with the members of the family school issues that were often central to the referral. So I found myself learning about something I hadn't been trained to do, which was family therapy. I think in the period over the past however many years that makes, one of the things that has crucially changed is that in their training, educational psychologists are prepared, with the benefit of 3-year training, for various forms of intervention. The expectation is that educational psychologists will not be in and out consultants, but will be engaged in an ongoing way with young people and their families in work using forms of therapy which we didn't have words for or the notion of then, like CBT. So I think that was one of the changes that you would notice. I would rather hope that you'd also notice that the building I was in, an old primary school functioning as a primary school, and I was in the medical room. It had a low ceiling and was very dark, and I felt terribly unwelcoming to our clients. Nowadays, people are liable to be in a very large, multi-occupied room with no privacy to see clients. On the other hand, with much more direct contact facilitated with a range of other people working in education or in children's services. We worked with social workers and were very much part of the process of assessment when children came into, came into care, when children were taken away from their family homes, and an assessment had to be made as to what might be the best thing for them. So one of my memories of those first few years of working as an EP was doing a good deal of work with social workers on thinking through the future of some children. I trained here for 1 year in what was not yet an MSc, it was a postgraduate diploma. Though when it became a master's, the actual neither the time nor the curriculum changed dramatically. I was trained in a period when we did some very interesting placements organised by a marvellous woman who was not an educational psychologist, Grace Rawlings. Her background was in clinical work, and my placements were in the Department of Child Psychiatry at UCH, where she was a clinician, and I did a summer placement where I visited a range of provision for young people with emotional and behaviour difficulties. We called them maladjusted. By the time I came here, initially as a fieldwork tutor, some years later, a number of features in the course had shifted. We spent ages when I trained learning about remedial reading, and it was called remedial reading. We studied projective techniques, and the Rorschach test took 20 hour-and-a-half seminars. When I came, and Rodney Malafant was then the director, it was a great pleasure to disassemble, deconstruct some of that commitment of time and to think carefully about what educational psychologists really needed to know about, much more broadly, in their engagement with understanding children's personality and emotional life. My appointment here was on secondment. I was the first, I think, in UCL, but also one of the first 2 or 3 nationally to be seconded from a local education authority to act as a placement tutor, fieldwork tutor on the training. And I spent half my time here and half my time in the London Borough of Hackney. I think a crucial element of what has changed is that the training has expanded. The young people who I have met in the trainees seminar room over the recent years have the advantage of training over a 3-year period. Their training is broader and deeper than we had. Looking back, I feel embarrassingly superficial in what I did when I first became involved. And I think that's a marvellous shift and has great potential for the future. Something I envy current tutors is the access they have to video. We sat and watched students working with their clients in a room, and we obviously changed the atmosphere and feeling of the interview in ways that it's impossible to fully understand. Nowadays they can use video for training purposes, review the video, have students review the video themselves, so they are observing themselves, whereas there was a bit of a top-down feeling about what happened in the 80s, 90s, early part of the millennium, when we would be watching them, and there was very much a sense of the tutor as having the expertise. I sense that the young trainees today have more of a feeling of taking ownership of the development of their professional skills, and it's something I would greatly welcome. The 1-year course was a terrible constraint. We were constantly being told you ought to cover this and you ought to cover that, and these were new topics and there was not the time to do it properly. We tried hard not to allow it to become a superficial gliding over a very large range of topics, but you had to balance that against giving serious consideration to topics that needed to be included. So during the late 80s and 90s, this course and many others through the country began to take the new diversity of the UK population seriously. And that was a very important development, certainly as seen from a London perspective. One of the skills that an educational psychologist needs is the ability to critically analyse and problem solve a situation. And I think that both in terms of providing frameworks for doing that, and possibly more important, modelling and eliciting styles of analytical thinking. I admire my colleagues on the initial training course enormously for what I observe the students to be learning. The course is structured, predictable. It does what it says on the tin, and there is a tin and there's writing on the tin. The assessment and evaluation relates closely to the course's objectives, and I've just been in a faculty exam meeting. The group of tutors involved in educational psychology training have maintained a focus on the needs of that training and have not allowed some of the concerns that relate to academic psychology and academic examining in a university to get in the way of ensuring that we both develop professional skills and evaluate them. A very important feature of EP training now in the professional doctorate era is the training in research skills. As an ex-principal EP, I'm very aware of how valuable at local authority and indeed school level those skills can be in helping people to look in a rigorous way at some of the challenges they face. The scope of the staff skills in the team, and it's evidenced in the range and scope of trainee theses. The scope is wide across quantitative and qualitative and combined approaches to research. There is the possibility for students to choose what's appropriate for their research question. It's important that they are trained to think carefully about all the options, and the right answer is what will address the challenge you've set yourself in your research, and not doing an approved UCL one way of doing research approach. I think a particular development over the last decade has been that the support for planning, conducting and analysing qualitative research has extended way beyond what it once was. But that has been gained without losing a rigorous and demanding teaching of quantitative methods. The students are exposed to and helped to critique a wide range of quantitative methods of analysis. The strategy for assessing trainees' abilities in relating to interviewing, assessing their clients, the strategy for assessment has been evolving in very, very interesting ways that Jane and Sandra have been involved in. I perceive that as very important, and it's sometimes I was external examiner elsewhere or an examiner here, but it's my impression that this aspect of the evaluation of trainees' skills is more rigorous and deeper than it has been in the past. And that, I think, is a characteristic of the work here. I suppose I've been practicing and teaching in educational psychology for quite an extended time. It remains the position that educational psychologists nationally and probably locally are very uncertain of their role, its boundaries, its importance. When I came back to UCL after a spell in a general psychology department, when I was working, among other things, with trainee teachers, I was struck by how little the debate within professional educational psychology had moved forward during the period I'd been away, which was about 10 years. And that's still true today. It is an unconfident profession with a remarkable amount to be confident about. It remains the case that as political structures for managing education and or children's services have shifted, as fashions dictated by government decree like Every Child Matters, as these fashions have changed, and we are at the moment in a worrying, appalling period when some very reactionary political pressures are making themselves felt. Throughout that time, professional educational psychology has continued to keep faith with a core set of scientific, professional and liberal values. I very much hope it will continue to do that, but I'm bound to say that the changing scene nationally, the changing context for our work, is going to prove challenging. One of the things that some educational psychologists feel quite worried about is the steady undermining of local education authority powers and funding. I was responsible at one time for a very large educational psychology service in a very, very large education authority. I think I became aware during that period that there were some advantages potentially in a more independent stance for educational psychology services. And I'm less bothered than some of my younger colleagues at the increasing trend for schools, clients, local authorities to have choices among a range of providers in relation to educational psychology. And that's a strange thing for a socialist to say, but it's how I've come to feel. Putting the client first can be more difficult when you are unclear who your client is. But playing bureaucratic games in a large, powerful structure like a local education authority has many disadvantages too. I very much hope that the profession will be successful in moving beyond a preoccupation that others have imposed on it to get the assessment of special educational needs right, and that we can move to apply psychology much more broadly within the education service and the range of children's and young people's services that exist. very encouraged by the pressure over the last few years as a direct result of legislation on special educational needs for educational psychologists and others to look much more carefully at the services provided for young people aged 16 to 25. And I very much hope that that will lead to some truly interesting developments for young people who are unequivocally their own masters and mistresses, where we will be working for them and not for either their teachers or their parents. When I trained as an educational psychologist in 68, 69, the Summerfield report had just been published, and for many contemporaries they won't be aware of what the Summerfield report was, which was a review of the role and training of educational psychologists carried out by a government-appointed committee. It's striking that we have in the last few years had repetitions of such reports, and it may well be that in the move towards freeing up the range of services that are available and in placing power in the hands of the commissioner, the question, who is my client, will raise itself again, and sound ethical practice, but also expanding professional skills, will play a part in the next generation of educational psychology training and practice.